You want me to start now? Yeah, okay. Ready. Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending our Journalism Futures Funding Against Fascism panel event. My name is Tala Nektua. I am one of the co-chairs at the Freelance Solidarity Project Digital Media Division at the National Writers Union. I'm just going to give a little bit of an overview about FSP and WU before we start our panel. So the Freelance Solidarity Project started in 2018 when a group of freelancers came together and began discussing how freelancers can advocate for better freelance protections and be in solidarity with staff workers. This was in the wake of a push to unionize media outlets around the 2010s. And this is where we get like the Writers Guild of America, East, and News Guild. In 2019, FSP voted to join the National Writers Union as a new division fighting for freelance digital media workers. NWU formed in 1981 at the American Writers Congress. One of NWU's major wins was negotiating an agreement for better protections for writers and winning a class action lawsuit to secure rights for more than $1 million in non-payment grievances. Although we are a small union and don't have collective bargaining rights like other unions do due to antitrust laws, we have achieved so much since 2018 that is cause for celebration, and we are only expanding further in our organizing efforts. Since 2018, FSP has had many organizing successes. The first is our legislative work, like the Freelance Isn't Free Act, which would allow freelancers to be paid in their work for their work on time. We have passed this law in states like Illinois and New York, as well as cities like Los Angeles and Columbus, Ohio. We have also organized events like Know Your Rights events to protect journalists from retaliation and censorship. Organized a three-part event to provide digital security training in legal protections, and organized an event about the treatment of incarcerated journalists face when covering their prisons, and many more. Due to the secrecy surrounding freelance rates, this past year we organized a challenge called a Freelance Solidarity Challenge, which encouraged freelance journalists to fill out our survey so we can understand more about the state of freelance rates, so we can counteract the secrecy plus organize for better rates. And finally, we have our unilateral announcements, UAs. Since freelancers can't collectively bargain, we found a workaround that could address and set standards for the treatment of freelancers. These agreements are voluntary and are between freelancers and management. We currently have UAs with several news outlets, including in these times, The Intercept, Jewish Current, The Nation, Defector, Hellgate, and Hearing Things. There's so much more working groups and organizing that FSP that FSP has done relating to Palestine, to a Red Lines report, to generative AI, that I wish I could showcase them all here, but it will take an entire hour. So this concludes my little presentation introduction of FSP. If anyone has any questions or wants to get involved, feel free to email me. I will add my email to the chat, and I will now pass it to Roshan to start the panel event.
Thank you so much, Kaula. Hello, everyone. I'm so glad everyone is here. Really appreciate you taking the time. This is Journalism Futures Funding Under Fascism. This event is hosted by FSP, and it is organized by our Media Economy Working Group, a collective within the union that looks for solutions to the news funding crisis. Um, Born out of a desire to turn our despair as precarious workers in a crumbling industry into action, the Media Economy Working Group looks for strong policies to fund the news across the country with the goal of issuing endorsements and pushing for more robust labor protections. At FSP, we do not believe that journalism's economic crisis is the result of inevitable market forces or a lack of desire for timely and accurate information. It's the result of the wealthiest tech companies on earth operating illegal monopolies for decades, private equity picking apart the spoils, billionaires buying up media conglomerates for vanity purposes, and regulators sitting on their hands as the news industry was shred to pieces. We believe journalists have a role and responsibility to fight back by advocating for robust funding and antitrust protections. If you're interested in organizing with us, we meet every other Friday at 12 Eastern on Zoom. We're on break all of August, along with the rest of FSP, but we're starting in September. You don't have to be an NWU member to join, but it would be nice. But today's conversation is about the attack on news funding, specifically nonprofit newsrooms serving communities of color and immigrant communities, and how they are navigating the most intense crackdown on the First Amendment in recent memory, including threats to funding. In the past few years, nonprofit newsrooms have been lifted up as a potential way forward for the industry, both because their favorable tax designation allows them to take in money from large donors and because they are driven by missions that, in theory, allow their values to align with the communities they cover. But it's not all roses. We've been seeing attacks on funding that are creating a sense of precarity within the nonprofit world. In the past few weeks, we saw Congress cut $1 billion from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which provides funding to 1,500 local radio and television stations. The president has sued multiple media companies. The FCC is investigating multiple news outlets, including NPR and PBS. And as this has happened, the administration has threatened corporate diversity initiatives, potentially creating a chilling effect in newsrooms that have already done a somewhat poor job covering communities of color. But each of our panelists has been working to create a stronger news ecosystem for communities of color and immigrant communities. Mazin Sidahmed is co-founder and co-executive director of Documented, a nonprofit newsroom dedicated exclusively to immigration coverage in New York. Lara Witt is the editor-in-chief of Prism, a newsroom covering communities of color, and is a founder of Media Against Apartheid and Displacement, a coalition of newsrooms covering the genocide in Palestine. Alicia Bell directs the Racial Equity in Journalism Fund at Borealis Philanthropy and is a founder of Media 2070, a consortium of media makers and activists collectively dreaming reparative policies, interventions, and futures. Welcome, all of you. I'm so excited to have this conversation with all of you. The first question I'm going to ask is directed at Alicia, but I think it's something that all three of you can speak to. So if Alicia, you want to answer first, that would be great. And then other folks can chime in. So the first question is about funding over the past 5 years and how it's changed. Um, Alicia, your work focuses on some of the problems that newsrooms have had covering communities of color and sort of like envisioning positive ways forward and reparative forms of media for specifically for Black communities. How are you seeing funders act in the current moment as opposed to the first Trump administration and the wave of funding we saw after the 2020 uprisings? And in general, and I guess this is for everyone, how do you navigate these large philanthropies that can sometimes be fickle with their funding and which can shift dramatically based on political perceptions? Um, and yeah, Alicia, if you could go first, that would be great.
Thanks so much. I'm really excited to be here with y'all. I do want to preface that I'm coming off of my nibbling being at Junior Olympics. So I'm giving hoarse. I might lower my voice at some point. It might be a little bit like late night radio. But I'm still here with y'all. Um, so thanks so much for that question, Roshan. So I think in the past 5 years, what we've seen is that, and one of the differences between this last Trump administration and this one is that in the first Trump administration, of course, we had a presidential campaign, a president, an administration who was attacking communities, attacking people, in all different kinds of ways. But I would say that that first administration was more of an experimental presidential administration. And in between the time of that first administration and now, there was a lot of time to kind of go back, go back to the drawing board and re-strategize. To be honest, I don't know. I don't know that the Trump presidency we have now is the Trump presidency that we would have had in 2020. Because what happened was that over that span of a 4 year Biden administration, there was time to cultivate angst, time to cultivate divisiveness, time to cultivate anger, ways to kind of point things at a person and at a political party instead of kind of looking at things systemically. And there was an ability to kind of re-strategize and reframe. And so what we see now is that there is a continuation and a kind of emboldening when it comes to attacking communities, and attacking this kind of wanting to really root down in the status quo. Um, but also there is in philanthropy, an attack on people's ability to give. There has been this kind of cultivation of a narrative that by and large, philanthropy redistributes resources to leftist causes, that it is liberal, that it is progressive. Um, I hear some of those talking points within the field of journalism as well. I was at a convening just about a year ago last summer where folks were like, journalism philanthropy needs to focus more on conservative communities, focus more on right-wing communities, because there's not a lot of philanthropy going there, when in fact it's the complete opposite. The way that the right funds is big, it's incredible, it's magnificent. It's long game, right? It's like, oh, you got an idea? Let me give you 10 years to work that out. Oh, you want to shift something for 50 years? I know you might make a few mistakes now. It's okay. But in 50 years, you're going to have the oppression that you want. And so that kind of funding strategy, that is absolutely more trust-based than any other kind of philanthropy strategy is what we see for folks who are seeking to maintain a status quo and who are seeking to really root into a future that is inhumane. And so even more than any political party, because I'm not here to say, I'm a partisan person, and I'm also not here to say like, the Democrats are doing great, because we know that's not true. But what I am saying is that there is a group of people who don't care about humans, don't care about human life, don't care about humans thriving, don't care about the world. And then there are people who are trying to do something different. And the people who are trying to do something different are some of the folks who are on this call. Um, I would say when it comes to journalism philanthropy, there's a few different things we've seen. We have seen a really proud increase in funding for BIPOC communities. But that increase has been from like 7% to 11%. It has been, but there's been a lot of fanfare for it. Um, and people have been really happy. They've been really proud of themselves, and I'm happy for that too. Um, because, we need that 4%. But it could be more. There are more people of color in the US. And what we've seen by and large is more funding for journalism, coming from different kinds of issue areas. I would say that sometimes that funding for journalism and media um, is it's messy because sometimes it's called media, sometimes it's called narrative, sometimes it's a content area. Um, but I would say that there is more diversified access to journalism funding. Now, right now, if while we have an administration that's attacking philanthropy, um, we see a different kind of rolling back than we saw before. And then in terms of kind of the fickleness of all of that, because as much as we've seen this 4% go up, we can see it go down. And we've heard people over this past year being asked to take out black lead from their grant agreements, their grant proposals. We've seen people be asked to sign statements saying that they won't do any kind of reporting on Gaza or on Palestine. So we've had those kind of direct conversations that have been happening. But one of the things I've been really reflecting on is the things I used to train journalists on. So before coming into this work, I was doing a lot of community engagement work and a lot of work around audience engagement. And this was in that kind of time and period where there was a lot of conversation on trust in journalism and a lot of surveys going out around how there was no trust in journalism. And one of the things that I came back to in kind of that reflection on trust was that trust is neutral, that trust is neither affirmative or negative, that if you tell me who you are, if you show me who you are, I can trust you to be that. Um, and when it comes to philanthropy, I think that's one of the strongest ways to engage with philanthropy, is not to expect affirmation, but also not to expect negation, but to really do a study and an observation on who people are and what they care about and what their words show they care about and what their actions show they care about, and then figure out how to engage with them that way. Because if we are not, or if we're kind of understanding truth and trust as neutral, then that allows us, and for folks here who are really steeped in observation, steeped in reporting, steeped in investigation, to also be nimble, and be as nimble as people are fickle.
Yeah, thanks so much, Alicia, for all that. Um, Mazin and Lara, do you have anything else that you want to add? Funding now versus 5 years ago, changes in funding?
I feel like we've had to work harder to convince people that funding the kind of journalism that we in here do is part of making a shift in like a culture shift, that it is critical in terms of informing our movements, in terms of allowing people to inform themselves to make their decisions for their everyday lives. We have had to convince people, funders, that movement journalism has a place in grabbing onto the readers and the audiences that have shifted over to social media, more so like informing themselves through TikTok videos and Instagram, which isn't necessarily a terrible thing, but movement journalism and journalism itself that is rooted in social justice and liberation has a critical place in that infrastructure, in our infrastructure, to inform each other, to keep each other safe, to investigate and observe and do very rigorously led, fact-based, fact-checked journalism that often falls between the cracks or falls through the cracks on social media. We need each other, right? And there is no good, strong movement and journalism infrastructure without these things playing with each other. So a lot of the funding discussion or the discussions that we've had with program managers and people at foundations, have been those of like, we are critical, we are an essential part of this, and not funding us is what you are witnessing now is already the erosion of journalism in our space, in all these spaces. Like what we are experiencing currently is because journalism, the way that we knew it, is dying or dead. And I'm not saying that that's the one that should be in existence, but we have less news, we have less local news, we have less access to information that is fact checked, which is how we exist in this time now. I have many more things to say, but I'll pass the line to Mazin.
Yeah, it's such a good point. We see that a lot in the immigrant rights space as well. There's a curiosity about journalism that's been forming over the last 2 years, just in line with this conversation around narrative change. So, interestingly, narrative change is something that a lot of movement folks in the immigrant rights space are very interested in, but they don't see journalism as a part of that. They think of it as culture, advertising, music, but journalism, which the right is very understands very clearly is such a critical part of how people understand politics in the world on these kind of leftist spaces. Excuse me, folks are still trying to grapple with what role journalism plays now. So we've been doing some funder education around that, and there's a growing understanding and curiosity around it. But it, like you said, Lara, it's been a challenge for sure to help people understand the importance of journalism and the fact that they can't just tell us what to do. I think that's also part. You can just go to a TV show and be like, yeah, make a show that makes immigrants look good. You can't really do that with a news organization. So it creates a complexity. That I think is really difficult for them. So we Documented was born in 2018, and we've seen this kind of evolution over the past few years of how journalism philanthropy has grown. And I'd say that we should celebrate the wins as well. I think the work that Alicia has done in really organizing a lot of funders and helping them understand the importance of this type of work has unlocked and changed just the way people talk about our types of news outlets, the way people understand our type of news outlets. When we were born, there was an obsession over reader revenue and building a Guardian type membership model. And if you didn't have that and you didn't have 10,000 members, you weren't going to be sustainable. And every foundation was basically thinking about their role as a stopgap solution from, the collapse of advertising revenue until whatever the new thing that emerges is. Philanthropy was just going to be in there for a few years in between to kind of like tide us over to that. And I think slowly funders are starting to understand that no, this might actually be a permanent state of affairs and that there is no like next place that we're heading towards, that philanthropy might be a permanent part of the equation. And an understanding that a diversified philanthropy pool and things like that might be a different way to understand what sustainability looks like and what sustainability means, especially if you're serving a low wage community that can't pay $15 a month for a subscription. So that has been successful, and we've actually seen a shift in a lot of the ways that funders think about it. As we were coming into this new second Trump administration, I was pretty pessimistic about where I thought philanthropy was going to go. They tend to follow the Democratic Party, and the Democratic Party has shifted to a much more anti-immigrant perspective. The Biden administration and Harris as well. So I thought that funders would maybe look at the type of work that we do at Documented and be afraid of it. And it's been a mixed bag. We've seen a lot of people step up, and we've seen a lot of folks, especially folks from the Bay Area whose philanthropy and money comes from tech, really pull back and not want to be associated with things that speak around immigration or people of color or anything around that. So that has been interesting to see. But I will say that there are folks who've stepped up. We've been in a lot of the same conversations that Alicia was describing around changing in language, folks not wanting to be associated with certain things, be people being concerned about subpoenas. But I'd say for every place that we've seen step backwards, we've seen folks like Democracy Fund and others really want to be out front and want to do things. So it's been a real mixed bag.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Mazin. And I just want to mention to everyone that if you have questions, you can put them in the chat and we will hopefully have some time for a Q&A at the end of this. And yeah, some of what you were saying, Mazin, I mean, I feel like, we should mention when we talk about narratives that the Republican Party in the 2024 race outspent on immigration ads like 6-1 versus the Democratic Party, and then after the election, the Democratic Party acted as if there was some organic cultural shift towards being anti-immigrant. It's like, no, you made no effort whatsoever to change this narrative, and then the narrative changed. But since we're talking about immigration, I did have one question for you that you sort of touched on, but it did seem like, and just based on talking to my friends who are immigration reporters, that in the first Trump administration, there were more immigration reporters in general, just like in staff and in newsrooms. And that erosion of immigration reporters happened over the course of the Biden administration. largely because people, even though the Biden administration's immigration policies, many of them were pretty much the same as Trump's immigration policies. They sort of like kept in the like the main lever to just sort of eject asylum seekers, um, and yeah, and then over the course of those 4 years, we've seen less immigration reporters. But I'm wondering if going back to this kind of like if there's a kind of thermostatic effect of like now there's way more negative coverage of immigration enforcement. Are you seeing something similar to what you saw in 2017 when people who were maybe not activated on the issue suddenly were?
Yeah, absolutely. It's so funny actually. In January 20, what was that? When did Biden come in? 2021. We had a call with the editor-in-chief of a big news outlet who wanted to partner with us. And they were like, well, what are you going to do now? Like, immigration's done. Like, it's not a topic anymore. So they actually disbanded their immigration team and reassigned all the reporters. And they were like wondering like how we might think about this issue, like how we were going to evolve as a news site. And Max and I just laughed, obviously. We prior to starting Documented, we've been immigration reporters before Trump was elected. We've been immigration reporters in the Middle East. So it's for us, the reason we wanted to start Documented was we understood this was the biggest story of our generation is going to reshape everything from it's going to be affected by climate change, conflict, everything that was happening in our world. So this wasn't just something that Trump invented and was going to go away when Trump left office. So it it's clear to us that big newsrooms have always had a complicated relationships with this beat. And it's very similar to, I think, people who cover race and policing. There's a great one of the best immigration reporters out there is at the Atlantic, Caitlin Dickerson. She's spoken about this on podcasts about how she was advised throughout her career, don't keep reporting on immigration. Like it's going to be bad for you professionally. Immigration is a beat that, you won't be able to excel in the industry if you continue to report on immigration. So for whatever reason, I don't fully understand it. Obviously, you can just say it's racism and this is something that's about people of color and that's why. But I don't know, there's just something else to it as well that I feel there's something like readers, the way that readers consume immigration news as well shifts, and that's why it's not prioritized as much. But we definitely saw a decline in the amount of immigration reporters during the Biden administration. People who were like this person, other people who were covering immigration that I know of, were reassigned to other beats, and it was deprioritized within the entire industry. And now, as we see, similar to policing, we're seeing a ramp up, everybody scrambling to find immigration reporters, people contacting us every week, asking us for advice on how to cover immigration, what kind of policies they should implement, trying to find reporters, trying to find people who speak different languages. So we're just constantly in this cycle of folks trying to figure this out. And how the public reacts, though, has been interesting. I don't think the level of public activation has been quite to the same extent. Obviously, we saw those huge protests in LA, but I think that the ways in which it's being covered might be impacting the way in which the public is reacting to it as well. So I think maybe over time we'll start to see those similar levels of engagement that we saw during the first Trump administration. But the public response to the reporting hasn't been quite to the same level still, and I'm still trying to figure out why that is.
I have thoughts. We've been talking about this a lot at Prism. So Tina Vasquez is our features editor, but she's also a reporter for us and does a lot of investigative reporting around immigration. And we noticed during the Biden years that, similar, like, you're good now, right? You can just like shift to another beat. And we're like, nah, we're gonna keep going because yeah, it's still very much an issue. And just because you care less about it doesn't mean that there's less to report on. Actually, it's harder to do the reporting because it's less and it's so much more opaque. So any Democratic president under Obama, which like saw the highest number of deportations ever, Um, it was very unpopular to report on immigration because we had this like great hope throughout the DNC of like things are fixed now, racism's done. Um, and yeah, it was the same thing through the Biden years of like, no, you don't need to report on this anymore. You can focus on other things, on things that matter to us. I think one of the reasons for why the reaction is what it is now, which is like much more muted in terms of our immigration reporting, is that the Democrats are actually very much in line with the Republicans and the hard right, the far right, in terms of immigration. They're like, yeah, we don't really care. Go ahead, you can build deportation centers in the middle of the Everglades. You can lock people up in cages. And the public, especially the liberal public, are in line with the DNC. They don't care. They don't care who makes their food. They don't care who is, behind the mass agricultural machine. They didn't care that children were getting harmed within factories when they're just packaging chicken. They didn't care about any of those things then. They don't care about them now because they think it doesn't directly impact them. And then there's also the issue of the fact that their attention is spread so thin across so many different ways, and people are so distracted by things that are unimportant, whether it's celebrity culture or whether it's the fact that they have to work 40, 50, 60 hours a week. They don't have any attention to spare to people who might be struggling even more so than they are. There's a critical lack of empathy and compassion within the US because the US is fundamentally very individualistic. And so it's like trying to build in this kind of care and compassion for each other, for our communities. And I think part of our responsibility as editors and as people who are working in media and media spaces is trying to, one, do political education and literally teach people to care about each other, engage with their communities in that way, as well as do the reporting. I think that those two things are connected. We're having to do re-education as well as continuous education through journalism.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to that and say, like, when we talk about what journalism does, we do talk about it as a thing that's producing and sharing information with folks, but also as a vehicle for strengthening proximity. Because when communities don't have that proximity, then it is a lot more challenging to understand kind of what the impacts of policies are, or what the impacts of political actions are on people who you say you care about. And if you don't know those people, then you can't really even care about them. And to your point about people working more, there's also, I would say, the kind of increase in crime coverage, and the increase in carceral coverage, period, also impacts people's fear of each other. And so if what we know is that one of the best ways to organize communities is to get to know your neighbors, but there are narratives and biases that are being created around not getting to know your neighbors because it's scary and it's dangerous, then that is a thing that prevents people from also being strongly organized and mobilized. And so I think there's like that piece around proximity, and culture creation has to be stronger. But one of the things, I think my colleague Jessica is on here, Jessica Wynn, who is like one of the most badass Virgos you'll ever meet. But Jessica and I have been talking a lot recently. We were at a panel and someone was talking about that like 3% data point, which is that like if you have 3% of a place mobilized or organized, you're more likely to achieve success when it comes to social change and social movement. And so they were pointing out that like in the US, that 3% is about 10 or 11 million people. Um, and so one of the things we've been talking about is that it is much easier, for media to engage 10 to 11 million people than it is to mobilize 10 to 11 million people in the streets and in direct action. Um, and so have really been reflecting on and thinking a lot about, Augusto Boal's kind of theater of the oppressed and what it means to have a media that is, actively creating kind of spect actors, or audience actors. And so much of Boal's work was about theater's ability to kind of break the fourth wall and make audience members into actors who are engaged in kind of dismantling their own oppression and disempowerment. And so I've been thinking a lot about how if we look at the Grammys, we look at the Olympics. There's already media events that are mobilizing over 10 to 11 million people. But how cooperatively, um, even if we're not gonna, like to Mazin's point, we're not gonna be a Guardian, we're not gonna be a kind of 10 million membership model, but how we can cooperativize, reaching 10 to 11 million people and kind of building those people into audience actors.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for chiming in on that one. My next question is directed at Lara, but other folks can chime in. It's about Palestine, Palestinian speech and reporting. So we've seen a lot of threats, obviously, to Palestinian speech in the past 2 years. And in general, the media has, over the past 70 some odd years, has not been very good at covering this issue. But in last November, Congress introduced a bill, HR 9495, so-called nonprofit killer bill, that would have allowed the Treasury Department to revoke nonprofit status from organizations it labeled as committing terrorism or supporting terrorism, with potentially chilling consequences for pro-Palestine speech, given that Palestinian liberation has long had an intertwined history with America's legal formulation of the idea of terrorism. Prism has done some really great reporting, both on Palestine and even the issue of this impacting nonprofit newsrooms. In July, you published an article showing that nonprofit newsrooms were already losing funding just for covering ceasefire protests. One newsroom lost $100,000 in funding based on a single article covering the protests. And even for outlets that aren't directly covering Palestine, all of these crackdowns on speech are canaries in the coal mine. And obviously anything that can allow the federal government to easily revoke nonprofit status can be used for any type of suppression of speech. So my question is, how are you navigating these threats to journalistic freedom? Have you had any threats to your funding? Have you faced any pushback about the Palestine coverage you've been doing? And yeah, how are you navigating this?
I'm a deeply anxious person, so it is in my nature to imagine the worst case scenario, the worst case scenario, and plan around it. That's a very useful baseline for me. No, my heart is not well. It's a deeply stressful time. Prism has been navigating this pretty well. But we have met our budget for the year and into next year too. So funding wise, we're doing well. And I think that is because we are doing the kind of journalism that people want to see and need to see. Whether they know that they need to doesn't really matter. We present it and they're like, oh yes, this feeds me, this nourishes me. And this is what I was looking for. So we just have followed our gut and our instincts of like, what is moving people the most? What are the things that we know that we need? What are the gaps that we need to fill that mainstream media does not do? Right. So since the beginning of this genocide and in the last 75 plus years, media, whether it was entertainment media or news media, have always been in opposition to Palestine and have worked side by side with Israel in order to create the structures that we know now that we are currently fighting against, which is a mega imperialist machine versus indigenous people and a global South that is fighting for liberation for all. And so not only are we just reporting on the fact that this genocide is happening, but we're trying to undo decades of oppression, decades of media war crime laundering. So like I said earlier, it is a re-education of the people of like, yes, this is happening now, but the Nakba happened 75 plus years ago. And so this is just a continuation of that. Gaza has been under siege for over 16 years. Israel has always controlled how much food, how much medicine has access to Gaza. The Palestinian Authority in the West Bank has always been intertwined and at the beck and call of the US and of Israel and other Western powers who are making Palestine pay for Europe's crimes and the US's crimes. So we had to not just address what was currently happening, but also provide this historical context for people who were just coming in now in the last 2 years, which is a lot of groundwork to do, but it is our moral imperative as editors, as journalists, people in the movement space to do this, right? Because not because of like, well, what were you going to say, decades from now about what you did, what you were doing? I don't really care about like what future me or like anyone else in the future, what they are thinking about me now. We just have to do this now because people are being killed within this conversation. No doubt, 5 to 10 people were killed by Israel. Every single moment of my day is spent thinking about how do we undo these things? How can we push back against them? So whether it is platforming Palestinian reporters, speaking to them directly every single day via WhatsApp, checking in on them, ensuring that we are just doing our human duty to our Palestinian colleagues, to Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. I don't really give a fuck what funders think when it comes to that. They should be following our lead, right? Give us the money so that we can continue paying the reporters who are dutifully reporting on their genocide, on the genocide that is being inflicted on them. So if a funder came to us, which they haven't come to Prism and said, you have to stop reporting on this. We're doing our reporter's duty. No one has said shit to us. And if they did, it would be a different conversation, but we would find other funders who would back us because they actually have a moral clarity and they're not monsters. We do work with funders who do give a shit about this. We work with funders who are trying to figure out ways to support Palestinian reporters, whether they're in the US or whether they're in Gaza and the West Bank. They support Prism because they understand that what we're doing is critical to the media infrastructure, that other publications within Media Against Apartheid and Displacement are critical to the movement and media infrastructure. And so the ways that we've protected ourselves, if we need some sort of protection, is by working in coalition with other publications. So Media Against Apartheid and Displacement is a project of the Movement Media Alliance. The Movement Media Alliance is 20 to 21 different media organizations, from like podcasts to publications, doing different kinds of journalism work, working together to create a stronger infrastructure where we work together to fundraise, to just talk, chat, plan editorial projects. We have a Slack workspace where we organize together. We have fundraised $1 million this year in the first 6 months of just hanging out together and working really hard to organize. Like Alicia was saying, like it's these kind of networks and connections are critical for us. Because right-wing media is very well organized. And we're not just going to sit around and wait for funders to be like, we have a solution for you. We're presenting them with the solution that we need, that we know is going to work for the next 5 years to the next decade. So say someone were to pull our nonprofit status at Prism or any of the Movement Media Alliance members, our most immediate plan is to fold into another person's 501c3. So if Prism lost ours, we would become a fiscally sponsored project of Truth Out. If someone else lost their nonprofit status, another publication would absorb them. So we would be protecting each other with whatever IRS bullshit we can come up with. And then worst case scenario, the Movement Media Alliance becomes an LLC of some sort. We become our own like not piece of shit Condé Nast, and we fold all of our publications into it to provide each other with the legal protection that we truly need. So that's a solution that we have, and we'll just keep doing the reporting that we do because it's critical and essential, and it's the only thing I can think of doing from my position.
Thanks so much, Lara. Mazin and Alicia, did you have any thoughts on that, or we can move to the next question? I know that you're not necessarily doing Palestine coverage directly, but yeah.
No, but one of the things that I will say I think is really important to what Lara was saying is that that funder education piece in this regard is so important, not only necessarily even for coverage around Palestine, but around the funding of for-profit folks. Because as you were kind of mentioning that kind of domino effect, one of the things I was thinking about is how the other part of it is for funders to know that they can almost as easily fund LLCs and fund for-profit entities. And so I think for folks who are concerned about losing 501(c)(3) status, I do think having this kind of like this solidarity and coalition plan is important. And for folks who are in the space who have the opportunity to do funder education and have the opportunity to share resources with funders, it's also important to let folks know that they can fund more expansively, and that there are ways to do that. We fund both 501(c)(3) and organizations, nonprofit organizations, and for-profit organizations, and many more funders can do that as well.
Yeah, I'll just say that, yeah, it's incredible work that the Movement Media Alliance is doing. And from our perspective, we've done minimal coverage around Palestine. We've tried to find ways into covering it locally here in New York around immigration. And it has drawn the ire of some of our funders, or one of our funders in particular. And it was the only time we've ever done coverage that's brought a funder to question our reporting in that way, and led to like some really difficult conversations. So it's real in the immigrant rights space. It's been a huge problem. It's obviously people feel like they can fund immigration and still support the genocide, and those two things are not in conflict, and it's been a real challenge. But I think that yeah, folks like Laura and others are like really leading the way. Um, and I feel that the piece that Candice mentioned in the chat, that is real. Like the fear that a lot of leaders are feeling in this space right now is genuine. When Mahmoud Khalil got arrested, it was the first time in my career where I'd actually been afraid to report. Um, I've reported in Lebanon, I've reported in Sudan, never thought about these things in that way at all. And that was generally the first time when I was like, oh wow, they might actually come for me. Like this is different. So yeah, I appreciate the transparency, and I think more people should be open about that because I know those are the conversations I've been having in private.
Yeah, thanks so much. So we have time for probably one more question. I'm not sure if we're going to get to audience Q&As, but we'll see. We'll see how we handle this question. So last question for me is about generative AI. I have to put it in quotes. So we've seen news organizations facing financial shortfalls make deals with AI companies that have already trained their models on the reporters' work for small amounts of money out of desperation. Vox, The Atlantic, even the New York Times inked recently a $20 million deal with Amazon, even though they're suing OpenAI. And a July Pew report found that AI overviews caused a 50% reduction in clicks to news articles. Journalists are concerned that the companies profiting from their labor are making sweetheart deals with their employers, but the public also has a right to be concerned, as the companies in question have acted irresponsibly, building energy-intensive data centers run on fossil fuels, flooding the internet with misinformation and slop, causing mental health crises, arguably eroding critical thinking skills among high school and college students. So my question is, how should news organizations navigate these potential deals, or should they reject them altogether? And what kind of conversations have you had in your organization or with other folks about these Faustian bargains with AI companies? And this question's for everyone.
I have so much anger about this. I will be as quick as I can be. So Prism is staunchly anti-AI. Like that's it. Like you cannot use AI to formulate your pitches. You cannot use AI as a part of your creative process for writing. The only thing that we will accept and that we then request that journalists let us know that they use this is the transcription services that AI can provide for transcribing their interviews. But they have to go back and ensure that it actually transcribed it correctly. And then we also do that as well to make sure that it was properly transcribed. We listen to the recordings. We do lots of fact checking. But we, given our climate and justice reporting and given where data AI centers are placed, which is primarily in impoverished Black neighborhoods, we cannot report on, the AI data centers and then use AI. ethically, morally. Like it's just it doesn't go. We're not ready for AI. Like we're just not ready for it. We are not there yet. I don't know if we ever will be. We're still trying to figure out, like, I don't know, media people are still trying to figure out Facebook and like and Instagram and how social media is impacting their reporting and the way that we disseminate our information. And so you're just going to bring in AI. Like none of these things make sense, right? It's actually anti-reporting. It's anti-critical thinking. It is, I say that we need to slow the fuck down in terms of what we're doing and actually report very responsibly, very thoughtfully, very critically. These are things that continue to be lacking from a lot of reporting, and we make it a priority at Prism. I know that the other folks here do too. So that's where Prism's at. We will not make deals. We don't need to make deals. People come to us because they trust us, and we're not going to erode that trust.
Yeah, this is something that also makes me furious just to hear the ways in which some of the media companies speak about these deals as though this was a good deal. You know, they came to us, they gave us a good deal. You don't know what this technology even does. You have no idea. They don't know what this technology does. We've heard people from OpenAI say they have no idea where this technology is going. That is wildly irresponsible. The fact that they're being allowed to just create this Frankenstein with no idea of what impact it's going to have on our societies is wildly inappropriate. So I think that I would love to see more coalition building for us to come together and create a position, or I don't know if the policy work that you all are doing, some sort of unified understandings. I think what I'm seeing a lot from newsrooms is that people are just so heads down. They don't know what to think. They don't really have the bandwidth or the energy to develop an internal AI policy to really grapple with the big, meaningful questions that this approaches. They generally feel like I'm getting left behind. This thing is happening and it's happening to me, just like every technology. It's happening to me. I'm getting left behind. What do I do? So I think some sort of like movement or platform or position, I think people are really craving that, say like, this is what you do. This technology is unethical. This is the position to take on it. This is how you should approach it in your newsroom, would be something really powerful that I'd love to, yeah. If people wanted to work on that in the, people who are listening and others who are working on this already, maybe I would love to be involved in that.
Yeah, I'll add that, and I want to preface this by saying I'm a hopeful pessimist anyway. So the thing I I don't feel the same level of anger and rage around AI because I'm a reparationist. And the thing that doing work around media reparations has shown me is the way that harm alchemizes itself whenever it gets the opportunity. And so I, for better or worse, and I'm not saying this is the best way to be because there's probably some like unhealthy somatic thing that's happening, like because of this kind of dissociation. I don't know. But the thing that I've seen by studying media harm over the past 100, 200 years is that it's all the same. The ways that newspapers were kind of platforming slave ads is the same way that Facebook was platforming hate. The ways that newspapers were brokers for slave trading and brokers for the theft of indigenous land is the same way that we see folks creating this kind of digital delta in the South by through land theft and through land exploitation. And so for me, the like hopeful pessimist piece of me is really rooted in these things will continue to alchemize and will continue to create harm until we stop them at their core. And so for me, it's a question not even just about AI, but about what are our journalism practices, period. What kind of news and media are we allowing to be okay? And are we co-signing? What kind of policies are being passed? Because that kind of extraction, like AI learns from social media. It learns from journalists as a way to make money. And also, that's what we've seen with social media. Social media extracts from newsrooms, it extracts from individual reporting. And so, because that hasn't stopped, of course AI is going to do it, because why wouldn't it? It is all just, it's all a learning process. So I think the reason I don't feel as furious is because I'm like, of course this is happening. Um, and it's been happening. And until we figure out a way to really stop it at its core, it's going to keep happening and it's going to look like something else. And so I'm not, I think that that is absolutely the reason why we should be working in coalition, absolutely the reason we should be working in collective bargaining processes, absolutely the reason why we should be figuring out what our policies are around it. And I think it has to go further than that, because it has to be around like, are we okay with fiber and Wi-Fi being rooted in stolen land? Like if we're okay running fiber wires through stolen land, then of course there's going to be some other form of land exploitation. And so I'm not saying that's not a reason to like pick one and go, because I think as an organizing strategy, you have to pick a thing. You can't address everything at once, and you have to build power and you have to build a base. And I think whatever speaks to people, starting there as a place to organize against media harm and against extraction and exploitation is a good place to start, and then kind of broaden out from there.
Yeah, thanks so much. I do want to shout out, we do have a generative AI working group at NWU. We have like a set of principles that we published. I think we have a little zine that we published as part of it. And we have been working on getting those incorporated also into our unilateral announcements, just to sort of like protect people's rights in the use of LLMs, etc. But this is definitely something that we're all clearly, I think we feel the same way about. And I think, you know, in the future, if you ever want to meet up with NWU and figure out a way to organize in a coordinated way on this, I think we would all love to. We were scheduled to end at 1. It is 1:02. There are a few questions from the Q&A. If you folks are fine staying for a few more minutes, we could just sort of do the Q&A questions. If you have to go, I totally understand. But yeah, I'll just read some of these Q&A questions. In what ways might we learn from the path that youth media was subject to in this country in order to chart a future path for adult and multi-gen movement media? The federal government attacked youth journalism in the 70s and 80s. Philanthropy wasn't strong then, but the fact that the youth media infrastructure of the past no longer exists and youth organizing persists today is worth examination. And then another question, how do you all feel about having funders on your board? So if folks want to address one or both of those, that would be great.
I can address Diane's. I think she had to hop off, but Prism doesn't have any funders on our board anymore. Not like intentionally, but we've discussed it, and we've had not issue with it so much so, but just I think one of the key things that we've actually encountered is the difficulty in activating board members to be more than people who just like approve the budget, and are useful in ways of like connecting us to funders, to foundations, making those connections. And I think this is where board members who are funders or who are part of foundations come into use of like making those connections, because it is a very gatekeepy, insular world. And very few people are willing to make those introductions. So we've basically stayed away from it for now, because like it's like we don't really, the board can be useful to a certain extent, but honestly our audience and like just engaging with our project managers one-on-one has been a lot easier for us. We have project managers at foundations that have been really lovely and supportive of the work that we do at Prism, who have connected us to other funders or other programs within their foundation that Prism is well suited for. So I don't really have like a very clear answer, just of like, we don't, it's not that much of a big issue. Board members should be more useful in general, but like if they're not, like, I don't know, there's other avenues of support. And then I honestly don't have an answer for the first question. I don't know.
Well, I can hop in there because I was going to answer that question. So, um, one of the first things that came to mind about youth media was this documentary that has been being worked on the series called Barrio Television, and it traces back the kind of Black and Puerto Rican organizing that was happening in East Harlem, and what they were doing during, and that was it. I don't know if it's called youth organizing, but it was youth organizing. Um, and it was in partnership with folks who were a part of different kind of social movement groups. But the thing I think we can learn from that, and the thing I really loved about learning from those moments is that um, they knew that there needed to be different coverage happening on the local PBS station. And so what they did is that they worked with folks who were skilled in direct action, and those folks went in and did a sit-in during the phonathon. And they didn't have everybody do the same thing because they knew that everybody had different rules. And so for the folks who were going to be producers, camera people, kind of best boys, all of those kinds of things. Those folks weren't necessarily engaged in the sit-in portion and the holding space portion. So it was also a lesson in triaging and figuring out how we triage based on our skills and our capacity and our risk levels, what risk we can assume. Later, that same group of people, there was a they had because they had been organized through this and they won. They like got what they needed on television. It ended up being shut down later down the line. But this same group of people organizing were also able to organize against funders and philanthropy to have. At that point, it was around kind of affirmative action and demographics coverage. And so similarly, they staged a sit-in at the Ford Foundation building, and like demanding that they require demographics data, and that they create funding strategies that align with that. And it was not, and it was also a lesson in triaging, and a lesson in kind of how do we build community relationships, so that folks can still do what they need to do while other folks do other things. Um, and so I think learning from that is really important. The other thing I will say too, that I think is especially true for youth media, and I think a lot about Fire Magazine, and kind of the potential of Fire Magazine, which was like way before the 70s. It was during the Harlem Renaissance. But that magazine was also one, and I would say the thing that is true about a lot of movement media that kind of continued into the 60s, 70s, 80s was that there was a weaving intentionally of art, and of art, narrative, prose, and investigation. Um, and there was political commentary, there was reporting, there was research, and there was visual art. And the art was beautiful and it was aesthetically pleasing. And it was accessible to people. Folks were pairing media creation with canvassing strategies. They were kind of out in the streets distributing to folks. And so I think one of the things I learned from that I take into kind of how I strategize is also like how are we triaging across skills, but then also how are we weaving together art, how are we making journalism aesthetically pleasing, and how are we reaching people through things like canvassing, through different kinds of strategies that are analog, and will continue to exist should the internet falter.
Mazin, did you want to chime in or?
I know we're way over time, but
Okay.
yeah, it's okay. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
okay. These were great points.
All right. Well, thank you so much, all three of you, for coming and joining us. This was such a great conversation. Um, this conversation is going to live on YouTube at some point. We'll send out a link to everyone who registered, and you can reach out to all of our panelists on their various social media handles. And yeah, thanks everyone who joined. If you want to join NWU, I think Serena put her info in the chat. If you guys want to reach out, we have a generative AI working group. We have this media economy working group. It helps us to get more people involved. We want to build a lot of solidarity, and we want people to not feel hopeless in the current media environment. So if you are feeling hopeless, you can come hang out with us, and we can maybe feel slightly less hopeless. But thank you for everyone for joining us. I think this was a great conversation. And yeah, I will leave it there.